This lesson is part of several lessons on the electromagnetic spectrum, and the title of this lesson is Visible Light. So the key terms we have today are visible light, optical fibers or fiber optics, spectrum, and prism. So we'll start by recalling the speed of light. Then I want you to recall the electromagnetic spectrum in correct order from longest to shortest wavelength. And then finally consider, is visible light the only light that is visible? Now you can pause the video at any point to write down your notes or to consider what's being said. So let's give a little clue to the recall tasks. First of all, the speed of light is 3 something. And the electromagnetic spectrum from longest to shortest wavelength is... Pause the video to give this a go if you didn't already get the answers. So here we have the speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. That is 300 million meters per second. And the electromagnetic spectrum in correct order from longest to shortest wavelength is radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. So here are our key terms that we're using today. You can write these down if you didn't recognize any of them, but they are not essential. So visible light is the part of the electromagnetic spectrum that humans can see. Optical fibers, or fiber optics, are thin glass fibers that guide visible light and infrared. They are used for communication. Spectrum is the band of colors that we see in a rainbow, at least that's specifically the visible spectrum. And the prism is a glass block with 2 triangular faces used to separate white light into the spectrum. Now remember, we need to be using the word spectrum instead of the word rainbow. So here we have the visible light spectrum in correct order. We have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. You need to remember these in correct order. Examinations may give you 3 of them and ask you for the other 4. Or they may give you 4 of them or 5 of them and ask for the missing 2. Now there are 2 memory aids you can use if you struggle to remember these in order. One is simply Roigbiv. It's a word created out of the first letter of each of the words we're remembering. That's called an acronym. So Roigbiv is an acronym for red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Meanwhile, there is an acrostic you can also use to remember. That's where you take the first letter of each word and turn it into a new sentence. So we have Richard of York gave battle in vain. That is an acrostic memory aid. So a prism can be used to make the spectrum of light. So here we have an example of a prism. White light is entering the prism, and exiting the prism is the spectrum. So the question we started with, is visible light the only light that is visible? Well, we call it visible light because it's the one that we, humans, can see. However, in our lack of humility, we fail to recognize that other parts of the spectrum beyond visible can be seen by other animals. So, for instance, butterflies, pigeons, and reindeer are all able to see a form of light that we can't see. They can see ultraviolet. So here are our uses. First of all, we have photography. Then we have microscopy, where light is magnified by lenses to see small objects. Telescopy, where light is magnified by lenses to see distant objects. And fiber optics, the most important one we need to remember. So visible light can be sent down long glass fibers for communication. So what happens is, when the light enters the glass fiber, the edges of the fiber act like a mirror to reflect the light, so that the light stays inside those fibers. It can then be sent several kilometers from source to receiver. And this is how fiber optic broadband works. Pulses of light are sent along these glass fibers. As they pass along, they are totally internally reflected, so that the light that enters one end comes out the other. And finally, the most important use, sight. The ability to see is based on visible light, at least for humans. So what are the dangers? Effectively, there's really no dangers of visible light except extreme high intensities. And that's a risk of blindness. So for instance, staring at the sun can cause you to go blind. So really, you can consider that there are no dangers to visible light, unless you're incredibly stupid. So our key points for today's lesson. Visible light is just a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light is made from the colours of the spectrum, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and that is in order from longest wavelength to shortest wavelength. Visible light can be split into the spectrum using a prism. Visible light is necessary for sight. Visible light is used in fiber optical communication, and it has no dangers except for extremely high intensities. And that's the end of the lesson.